Alright, so as a brief introduction, with the turn of the new century came a new era influenced by World War I, and it would also be influenced by our country's first Red Scare. It was a time defined by a strong fear of communism, propaganda, bombings, World War I, and extreme political decisions. This Red Scare would end up setting up an era that is uniquely American. So, what exactly were the global events that caused the Red Scare? In November of 1917, Russia had just been taken over by the Bolsheviks. Now, the Bolsheviks were a group of communists led by Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin believed in a government that was ruled by those of lower class. The United States, seeing as Russia's government had just been overthrown, had begun fearing that communist groups would make their way to America and the same thing would happen here. By around this time, World War I was still ongoing, and nationalism was very strong in America, fueled by lots of military propaganda. So beliefs of communism in this time was heavily demonized and seen as a threat against the nation. Ideas of anti-immigration had also become common, and as a result, lots of people were afraid that immigrants, specifically immigrants of European descent, would bring communism to America. Following the end of the war, military propaganda had since died down because there was no need for any soldiers. However, zero tolerance of communism America was still heavily influenced. The fear was so widespread that had someone been killed or prosecuted under the assumption that they were a communist, the general American public would not see this as a problem. And the general public's fears would soon be justified when, on May 1st, 1919, 20 bombs were found to have been mailed to several notorious capitalists, including John D. Rockefeller and several government officials. This type of incident would happen again, only this time the bombs went off. The bombing occurred on Wall Street, taking the lives of 30 people in 1920. According to the media and general public opinion, it was believed that this was the work of anarchists, which was one of the political groups that were demonized at this time. After the previously mentioned bombings had occurred, this would be considered the climax of this era when Mitchell Palmer, who was an attorney general, was responsible and ordered for what we call the Palmer Raids. These raids targeted a lot of groups that were either communist or harbored leftist beliefs, or sometimes even targeting regular immigrants who had just happened to be from European descent. From these raids, over 500 immigrants were deported, and thousands presumed communist supporters or anybody who just didn't fit in with that capitalist idea had been arrested. A fact about many of the raids is that they were considerably unjust and riddled with police brutality. As a result, the American public becoming aware of how these raids were being conducted, a lot of people began to question, were these raids even constitutional? And the short answer was no. So after the dust had settled, many Americans did not support Palmer's actions or no longer even believed the rhetoric of the Red Scare, and eventually Palmer himself came under scrutiny and lost a lot of his credibility after the alleged prophesized communist takeover was set to happen had never come. So eventually the fear dissipated, and therefore concluding and ending this era of the Red Scare until its eventual later revival in the 50s.